Xbox had exactly two successful launches, the Xbox 360, whose difficult journey I recently covered in a separate video, and the brand new Xbox Series S, which accounts for 70% of all Xbox sales this generation. What's remarkable is that both then and now, price influenced success. The Xbox Series S is the cheapest 9th generation console, but unlike the Xbox 360, it's also the weakest, which is why people predicted a grim future for it. However, it still runs all modern games. At first, there were tons of speculations that this little console would die before the generation ended, and it seems like we're getting close to that point. New releases perform noticeably worse than the premium version, but is this really the end? Today we'll talk about how it's doing in 2025, we'll break down all the pros and cons of this white little box, discuss who it's suitable for, and who should pay extra. We'll talk about who it fits and who's better off spending more. And were the haters right from the very beginning? This is an Xbox Series S review after 5 years. Let's go. Let's start with what everyone loves and criticizes about the Series S at the same time: price. Recently, Microsoft raised prices on all their consoles due to new tariffs in the US. And here's the thing. After they were canceled, or rather suspended, nobody's planning to roll back the prices. So now the regular Series S costs $380 and the 1TB version costs a whopping $430. For a second there, for $400 you can get a Steam Deck LCD if you don't care about graphics anyway. And it would actually be better since you can flexibly adjust both TDP and game settings, achieving at least 40 frames instead of locked 30 on Xbox. Well, or if you only need a stationary setup, just add more money and buy premium consoles from either camp. But wait before burying the Series S. There's the secondhand market where people sell this console at a very tasty price. True, PS5 and Xbox Series X can also be found cheaper there, but still the price gap remains significant. On average, for $200 you can find pretty decent options. And what do we get for that money? The Series S is basically a cut-down version of the Series X. Same processor, but the graphics card is noticeably weaker by several times, less memory, smaller SSD. The console was originally designed for full HD, not for 4K. And you know what? On a full HD TV, graphics still look decent. But on 4K, the blurriness really catches your eye. This isn't critical if you don't compare directly, but when you see game footage on YouTube from other consoles, even accidentally, you internally get the feeling that you've missed a lot because the difference is noticeable. You can already see how this little box is struggling with all its might in new releases, while delivering a picture far from ideal. And more games are appearing with only one preset setting at 30 frames. You could argue that in the past, everyone played like this and didn't complain, but back then absolutely all games were played like that. Whereas now it's hit or miss, some run at 60 FPS. And once you've tried 60 frames in some games, you won't want to go back to 30 in others. And on Series S, you don't have a choice. So no sugarcoating here. Even though Spencer promised at launch that the difference would only be in resolution, which wasn't true even at launch, and under magnification the difference was noticeable, well, now even without cropping frames, graphics are worse than on Series X and PlayStation 5, that's a fact. Blur, 30 FPS, or low resolution but at 60 frames, these are the compromises you'll have to live with. But there's an important point. Remember how GTA 5 came out on PS3 and Xbox 360 back in the day? Also not in the best quality, but everyone played and didn't complain, and only with the PS4 release did everyone notice how bad everything was. Because everything is learned through comparison, and this is probably the main problem of this generation, or rather the Series S. When compared to PS5 and Series X, the junior model clearly looks worse in terms of graphics. But if you forget about the premium consoles, don't compare the picture head-to-head. The Series S, as the cheapest and most compact console, still runs all modern games. And for those who don't care about graphics, and I know at least several such people who don't care about your raise and blur, this is the perfect option, especially with Game Pass. Many people actually only buy this console for the subscription. Speaking of which, at the generation's launch, Spencer promised a lot about it, just like about the Series S. But unlike the console, surprisingly, many, though not all, my promises were actually fulfilled. Game Pass can be loved or hated, but one thing must be acknowledged. It's the best gaming subscription on the market. It has tons of games, yes, old ones, yes, indie ones, but new ones come out too. And at the beginning of the year, Microsoft proved this so much that Phil Spencer even had to apologize that their games come out so often that you simply don't have time to play them. That is, Xbox finally started turning promises from generation start presentations into reality and releasing good new releases straight on release day in Game Pass. And not a couple times a year like before, but almost every month. Avowed, Atomfall, Doom, The Dark Ages, South of Midnight, Indiana Jones with a new Call of Duty. and these are just games from internal studios. Plus, you can count Stalker, Clair Obscur, and many other games from third-party companies. So if this subscription used to be considered indie junk, that's clearly not the case now. But Xbox, or rather its subscription, has one significant drawback in my opinion: oversaturation. Remember how in childhood, when you bought a game on disc, you'd play it to death simply because you paid for it and wanted to get the maximum from the game? That's how many hardcore games were completed that made you incredibly frustrated. Those classic Devil May Cry games with hardcore bosses. But you'd cool down and still come back. And what about now, if you encounter some impassable moment, that same hardcore boss or puzzle that can't be passed without an online tutorial, you just close the game and go download another one. Game Pass kind of blurs the pleasure of completing a game to the end, because you can switch to something else at any moment, especially thanks to Quick Resume, so you don't have to wait long. This doesn't mean the subscription is bad, it's just the flip side of having so many games in one subscription. Speaking of Quick Resume, Xbox has exactly 3 unique features that nobody else has, and they're pretty cool. Quick Resume itself allows you to quickly open up to 5 games, I think, since their saves are stored in temporary memory. And the point is, you don't need to wait for in-game saves. You can just exit at any random moment, like if you got distracted, and before you had to reach a save point and only then exit. Here you can exit at any moment and then return to where you left off, and do this with several games at once. The feature is as convenient for story games as it is useless for multiplayer ones, because you enter the game and everything seems okay, but the server connection has already expired and it kicks you to the menu and you have to log in again. Plus you spend the same time on it as a regular login, and you can't turn it off. But for story games, I repeat, this is just amazing. And the other 2 unique features are FPS Boost and Auto HDR, and while the first works in all games, FPS Boost and Auto HDR only work in old ones, to make games from previous generations noticeably better, instead of 30 frames, 60 or even 120. Plus improve the picture with Auto HDR, but even among old games, not all can be improved. There's only a list of selected games, and nevertheless, this is also cool. In general, Xbox's backward compatibility is already what you could call the 4th unique feature of the box, since Sony still hasn't added backwards compatibility with PS3, even though fans themselves have already made an emulator. True, only on PC, but what's the difference? However, there's a small nuance here worth considering. Series S runs backwards compatible games from regular Xbox One, and Series X from Xbox One X, for which many games receive patches with special improvements. Because of this, some old games, even despite FPS Boost and other technologies, still don't look great compared to Xbox Series X. True, buying this model for last generation games is strange, but the Series S for classic game enthusiasts is ideal in my opinion, especially considering the ability to install various retro emulators. But still, the main thing in my opinion is modern games, and here the Series S is starting to cause concerns. Since most of this year's new releases already run only at 30 frames, like that same Avowed or Clair Obscur, the latter is especially blurry. Although, for example, that same Doom runs smoothly at 60 frames, as does Indiana Jones. But still, it's already noticeable. If before, AAA games locked at 30 frames were isolated cases, now it's already statistics, and most likely the further we go, the more such games will come out. That is, a generation that was supposed to move away from this console cliché is returning to it on the little box, although 5 years after sales started. For reference, most games that came out before 2025 have 2 standard graphics settings from 30 to 60 FPS, with which, logically, picture quality also changes, as it should be, and such games differ from Series X only in resolution and maybe texture clarity with blur, as Phil Spencer promised. But this year, either games became more demanding or developers got lazy, but more and more games are coming out with only 30 frames, which is especially concerning since GTA 6 should come out relatively soon, which will be released on Series S2. This is even mentioned in the trailer. That's cool, but what will it cost? That is, how much will developers have to cut graphics compared to the premium version? There's no doubt it'll only be 30 frames, although even the fact that the game will come out on this console already makes it relevant for many. For example, for those who don't really want to spend money on a modern console since they already have a gaming PC, but want to play GTA at release. Because remember, the new part, like the previous one, will be a console temporary exclusive. In general, that we're approaching the Series S limit is obvious, but burying it is still very early. Let's start with the obvious. This console will suit those with a limited budget but who want to play modern games. If that's the case, then Series S is your choice, especially if you have an old full HD TV and don't plan to switch to 4K anytime soon. Yes, graphics are worse, but you're playing the same Starfield, Forza, Call of Duty as owners of more expensive consoles, and including GTA 6. An interesting category is gaming PC owners. I have a friend who built himself a powerful computer for $2,000, but still bought a Series S. Why? Well, because sometimes you want to play on the couch. Sometimes you can take the Series S with you to the country house. It takes up quite little space in a backpack and play the same games. But you can't drag a PC anywhere with you. Well, and for online games surprisingly, purely for multiplayer in Call of Duty or Apex, since consoles have fewer cheaters. And graphics in these games are already at a high level anyway. Well, plus it's an excellent console for kids. Of course you can argue that the first 50 years of a child's life are the most difficult, but honestly, a 10 to 15-year-old kid won't notice the difference between 900p and 1440p. What's important to them is playing Minecraft, FIFA, Fortnite with friends. And in general, as they say, from the couch a couple meters away, you won't really see the difference. That is, the key complaint about Series S is worse graphics and locked frame count at 30 in new games. But this is compensated by the lowest price on the market among current consoles. So you can get it for yourself if you play occasionally, an hour a day or once a week. You don't need top graphics, you just need to launch a game and play. It's important to remember, everyone used to play like this and it was normal. Yes, now it's a different generation, 60 FPS native 4K, but premium consoles cost more too. So you have to make compromises. And perhaps that's the perfect description of Series S. It's a console of compromises. If you're a hardcore gamer ready to shell out a round sum, it's better to just build a gaming PC without limitations, with Steam discounts, free online, and many other functions. Well, or if you don't want to mess with graphics settings, driver updates, and other stuff, premium consoles Series X and PlayStation 5, the latter even has a pro version for $800, are your choice. And Series S is the perfect option for budget gaming, yes with worse graphics, yes with 30 frames in some games, but running all modern titles, and if Phil Spencer is to be believed, it will run them until the end of the generation. In short, Series S is a cool console for a very tasty price, even after the price increase, especially on the secondhand market. It significantly lowers the barrier to entry into current gaming, and who cares about graphics if you're ready for compromises? Moreover, the older it gets, the more compromises there are. In the first years, everything was almost perfect, and where graphics were worse, it wasn't critical. But now more and more games are coming out only at 30 frames and with noticeably worse graphics. Such is the price of budget gaming. However, it still runs all modern games, and here everyone decides for themselves what's more important. In general, it's always been like this. Remember at least the last generation where both PS4 Fat and Xbox One held up well until mid-generation, and after that Pro versions came to replace them. Well, in this generation, you could say the Pro version came out right at the generation's release in the form of Series X. And Series S is just a console that runs games and costs little money. So criticizing it for this is complete nonsense. And whether it's worth buying or better to add money and buy the premium version, everyone decides for themselves considering their preferences in games and graphics. What do you think? Write in the comments whether you have a Series S and if you're satisfied with your purchase. Don't forget to hit like if the video was helpful and subscribe to the channel for new reviews. See you in the next video.